We have until 3 o'clock today. The schedule indicates 3:15, but we actually have another panel in here starting at 3:15, so we're going to go till about 2:50, 2:55, open it up to questions. And we have a small panel too, so if one of the topics is interesting to you and you have a question that you want to chime in with, just raise your hand and I'll try to glance around and notice that's happening. All right. Thank you. All right, so today we have a couple panelists. We had 3. We had a cancellation, unfortunately. And to my right, we have Rob Ray.
Hello.
Rob is a senior designer in the Human-Centered Design Group at NASA's JPL, Jet Propulsion Lab.
Indeed.
At the JPL, Rob leads a human-centered design practice for Protospace, the lab's flagship augmented reality platform for scientists and engineers. Protospace uses AR technologies to transform 3D CAD drawings into immersive, collaborative, problem-solving experiences. As the design lead for Protospace, Rob works to make Protospace something akin to a roller coaster ride that boiled the perfect egg, a simultaneity of spectacle and utility. Rob is also a visual artist and co-host of the Opposable Thumbs Creative Challenge podcast. And to his right is Susan Jewell. Susan has been a leader, innovator, and speaker and educator in the areas of space exploration, space medicine, edutainment, and astropreneurship. Very cool word. She has built crew teams for expeditions and analog missions in isolated and extreme environments. She pioneered Mars Academy USA and the Space Surgery Institute, organizations that focus on developing simulation-based training programs and VR/AR edutainment content to lay the groundwork for settlement of Mars and the Moon. Currently, she's focused on developing Mars Academy USA, a 21st century academy offering experiential learning and unique simulation programs for prospective young astronauts, professionals, and scientists. And she's also involved in an X Prize Foundation project, which we'll talk about. So we have a kind of a small panel tonight. In our previous discussions, the topics that kind of bubbled up as most interesting to talk about today has to do with immersive technology as a support builder for space exploration and space programs, and then immersive technology also as a mission enabler. So those are the two kind of things we're going to look at today. Immersive technology as a support builder. So, immersive technology is experiential, and Susan, you've been doing what you call analog missions, so it's immersive, but it's not digital, right?
No, it's real time with real people, but in a full immersive simulation. And that's really, I think, we can say it's kind of like the laboratory out in the environment versus your traditional definition of a laboratory, which is like confined in a building. And this builds a very authentic layer into the experience. And also when you're really trying to, of course, when you're building prototypes, you are able to now put in that authenticity layer, the complexity of trying to iterate and optimize your technology or your prototype. So it allows you to do that. At the same time, however, I think another important aspect of why we do these analog simulations in these austere environments is that we're looking at the 3 Ps. And what are the 3 Ps? Which stands for us is the physical aspects. What do humans encounter? What do they undergo? What are these challenges as astronauts or even people who are on Earth and are in real austere environments like Everest, or to go to Antarctica? And then the second P would be psychological. When you're talking about humans in the equation, every time humans are in the loop, you have to take care of that human. And when you put them in confined, isolated environments or dangerous environments, there is going to be psychological issues. So you have to look at that. And then in these analog astronaut simulations, we study that. And final P is the physiological, right? The physiological aspect. How does your body, on the physiological side, is affected? And so when you're talking about astronauts or anybody that's deployed or put into some really dangerous environment, isolated and confined, you're going to see those three issues. And that's what we're trying to do in these analog simulation training.
And I've seen in some of the images from your trainings that there are people wearing headsets, though. So you're integrating some digital immersive technology as well.
Yeah, so what makes us very different from a lot of other analog research, organization is that I really wanted to, I'm very much a geek in that way. I'm so passionate about exponential technologies, and so I want to innovate in that arena. And so I just see the seamless integration of using these technologies to be able to develop the platforms, but also to help the crew teams to be able to train and also to work on the technologies, right? To be able to be users and to be the testers in these environments. And it makes a perfect combination of both, that integration of that real research aspect and then the human user use and getting the data back. And that's very important so that you can optimize and you can do iterations. And as a scientist, you can collect data on a longitudinal basis. And that is important because if you can't collect the data, you only can do it one time. It's useless.
Right. Rob, some of your protospace technology you were saying is really important to get stakeholders on board with your design vision. Can you talk about that?
Definitely, sure. I mean, at the JPL, for those who may not be familiar with the organization, is a NASA center in Pasadena, California. The JPL focuses on missions without humans. Some people say unmanned missions. And those missions tend to be deep space orbiters, Mars landers, Mars rovers, that type of thing. And so often the JPL spends years and possibly even a decade or more working from what they call back of the napkin, right, where they just start drawing out your concept and are like, oh, I have this idea for this deep space probe or something, and then in number of years later, it becomes flight hardware on the as a payload to a space on a rocket launched into deep space. And so years are spent iterating on this design, and the reason the JPL does all this work, right, is for science. So any mission at the JPL starts with science goals. And then backing out from those science goals is what shapes the instruments that are used on the spacecraft, and then also the engineering and the experience of the spacecraft in situ, may be that on Mars or whatnot. And so throughout that process, right, real-world engineering problems and design problems come up. And so often engineers and scientists are working through, sometimes pleasurably and sometimes not so pleasurably, on trying to resolve problems that come up. And so what we do with Protospace is allow scientists and engineers to get together, collaboratively view a CAD model in 3D space through augmented reality using the Microsoft HoloLens, and have discussions, right? Which are kind of the most difficult things for us as humans to do, which is to talk to one another. I feel especially in 2019. And so I think, so our goal with that is to get people to come together, share and embody, using their human body as a measuring stick in some ways for a spacecraft and for a set of decisions or problems they have to get to, and make decisions and then move on, right? Our best meeting is for them to end early and then scribble a bunch of stuff on a whiteboard about how they're going to solve a problem, as opposed to, necessarily even being wowed by augmented reality. We have a pretty tough customer base because they're engineers and scientists. They're not often wowed by much. And so we do try to impress them a little bit with the tech, but then also make it as seamless as possible for them to just get immersed in the experience and move through their decision-making process.
And you provided a video. Let's take a look because it's illuminating.
This is, I think, Europa Orbiter. Yep. Or Europa Clipper, which was the most official name. This video is sped up a little bit just because it's a pretty long session we were having. This is actually not full scale. I think it's about quarter scale of the Europa Clipper spacecraft, which will be launching, I think, in 2024 if budgeting ever gets worked out. And this is a number of people. You can see my own goofy self in there in the back. walking around the model. And what's really funny about this is everybody who looks at Europa Clipper through augmented reality goes, "Wow, it's so big," and it's like, you've been an engineer on this project for years, and you never thought about how big it was? And they're like, no. So it's really nice to, even just in the most basic form of augmented reality, let people experience something at scale that they're used to working on, even on a 27-inch monitor, and just again be able to use their human body as a measuring stick for things.
Have you solved, has there been a moment where engineers have solved a problem because you think they had a spatial experience that they wouldn't have taught?
Yes. So I'll try to summarize. This was like when the light bulb came on for me for Protospace, and when I was like, I think we all have jobs where we're like, what am I doing here? You just kind of think like, what am I? I'm doing work. It feels good, but like, am I moving any kind of social needle or something? And it was right when I had joined Protospace, and it was typically, so Protospace is you book a room, right? Because it's augmented reality, and you kind of want it. You can do it anywhere, but it's kind of nice to have a room dedicated to the thing. And so the room is booked, and you're just kind of like, oh, we have people coming over, great. And they come in, and typically, any meeting, people kind of start and are talking to one another, and are kind of social, and the meeting's about to begin, and it's like dead quiet. Like no one's talking to one another, and that's like a bad thing. Like when a meeting's about to happen and no one's even asking like, how are your kids or whatever, like it's just, it's not good. And so, and there's a lot of like murmuring and stuff, and you're like, oh, this is not good. And so what it was there was a specific disagreement about the position of a sensor on a spacecraft. I won't say which one, it doesn't matter. But, and the problem with this, the issue is the sensor in some situations could be too close to the ground. And when it's too close to the ground, we all have cars, or we all have bicycles or skateboards, you scrape the bottom, which is really what you don't want to do with a very fancy spacecraft. So there was a disagreement, but like moving this sensor, right, could and probably would alter the type of science data you could collect because you moved it, right? Like, so it's typically these things are positioned very precisely in order for you to capture the data you need. But if you have to move it a little bit, it creates a big stir. So there was a big disagreement about whether this move was necessary. So we come in, and we were going there, and everyone's sort of there, and talking begins, but it's still kind of quiet. And then all of a sudden, this person, who I didn't know at the time, but is actually a lead scientist on the mission, like leaps on the ground, like leapt on the ground, and like laid on his back, and then like shimmied under the like augmented reality version of the spacecraft on his back, and like looked up, and was like, okay, I get it, okay, fine. And in 1 second, he went from like this email chain of disagreement that had happened for a week to laying on his back, rolling around on the carpet, seeing the instrument, and being like, okay, that's definitely going to hit. I see your point. Let's figure it out. And then everyone jumps up and starts like trying to figure out how to move it, in X amount of time. And I was just like, oh my gosh, I do a thing that matters. So that's my story. But it was really powerful, and just like also like so simple, right? It's not like you don't need a super fancy tool to do that. You just need to be able to load the model in AR and get people to agree that by doing this experience, they can come to some kind of agreement. And it worked out. So, and I can see actually this spacecraft is being assembled right now. And if you go to they have webcams so the public can see the assembly. And I can see the instrument in the webcam, and I'm always very psyched. I'm like, there it is, it moved. And it moved because the Protospace, the tool I work on, helped them come to an agreement that it should be moved. So it's nice. Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Susan, any thoughts on edutainment and how immersive technology, actually technology beyond analog, could help build support for the kind of work you're interested in, space exploration?
Absolutely. I think the word edutainment, education mixed with, entertainment is a new word, and I'd like to use, because it's kind of like the hybrid and mixing of the two. And in our analog missions, we bring in people who are non-medical. So we focus on this all. We bring in a very diverse, multidisciplinary teams, right? But in our Mars Medic, in our medical missions, we bring in, of course, the medically trained, and we mix them with people who have very minimum or no medical background. And then this is really interesting and fascinating, because then using the technology, whether we're using AR or VR, we try to give them that immersive experience and training. And we've been doing this in our tele-anesthesia and telesurgery project for the last 3-4 years. And the data we have so far is show that they're absolutely, with the VR and the AR training and having that immersive experience, there really is not that much of a difference in terms of the acquisition of skills and the learning, the learning curve for the non-medical versus the medical. Now I'm talking about people, not in a specialized, field in medicine. I'm talking general practitioners, right, who have very, just very kind of, yes, they've gone through surgery at some point in their medical school, medical training, but it's not their specialty. So there's still, the whole saying is, if you don't use it, you lose it. And so it's really interesting to see that the implementation and integration of these technology, of course, VR is, it's immersive, but when you're talking, you bring in the next layer of extended reality, right, which is the HoloLens, Magic Leap, spatial computing. That adds a more deeper immersion, and that, to me, is fascinating in terms of, with the feedback you can get from the non-medical people. It's like, wow, I really, testing the acquisition of knowledge and the skill sets and the retention is interesting. And what's fascinating is that they enjoy it. So this whole learning process is the whole paradigm of learning, your traditional, 20th century, sitting in a classroom reading books. It's like, no, that's the old paradigm. The new paradigm of education and learning, and we're testing these simulations, it's fun. Because if you don't have fun doing what you're not going to learn, it's going to be harder to learn. So this whole experiential learning with these exponential technology, I think, is the future new paradigm of edutainment, as I would say.
Yeah, that's awesome. I was actually, as you were saying, I was imagining this engineer or this scientist crawling on his back. I mean, that sounds like a fun meeting. Like that meeting just got fun watching this guy do that.
Yeah,
so.
I'm really glad he did that, because it was kind of funny, because you think, like, that went amazing, my tool is awesome, like, but what if he hadn't have done that? And everyone would just could have stood around and been like, wah, wah, wah.
Yeah.
So part of it also is us feeling like we're creating this is a strange word maybe, but like a safe space, a place where a person could lay on their back and roll around on the ground and do stuff. And I think that gets also into the idea of fun, or just like this idea of like creating these curiosity encouraging experiences or moments, right, where someone can just feel like they can accelerate into their thinking, as opposed to feeling like they're always having to hold back.
But I'm going to put in the other side of why, when we deploy to austere environments, are extremely dangerous, right? If you're going to go to Everest, you're going to go to these really dangerous environments, you have to put safety in as number one priority. And so, we use the technology for pre-sim training, pre-simulation training. In other words, before we deploy the crews to these environments, they train, using the technology, and it expedites the training process. They get familiar with the protocols, and then they have that, and they work together, and then we deploy them to, because you're not going to have them put on the technology when they're in the austere environments. It's just it's dangerous already, and that just adds another layer of stress, and things can happen. So in terms of the technology, there's advantages and there's disadvantages. What we found as a disadvantage is that it's for those who have no background in technology and how to use it, they find it very difficult. So like if you're an engineer, you're a designer, that's great, okay, you get to play with it. But there are people that we've encountered have no experience, never even put on a Google Cardboard, a VR, and it's like, okay, now here's the technology, you're going to, they have no idea how to use it. So that's a huge challenge, to onboard people who are the lay people to use it.
Interesting. I want to move on to our next topic, because it's a very interesting one, which is immersive technology as mission enabler. So we've talked a bit about remote real-time operation. Your X Prize is the Avatar X Prize, so that's about remote operation, multimodality, haptics, visual, audio, being there, and of course, space robots, planetary robots have the same set of issues. How does immersive technology play into that? Start with whoever wants to.
Well, if you stay to the next panel, it's actually, we are going to go a deep dive with the team, with our Avatar Medic, which is, as David say, we are an official team for the $10 million Anna Avatar X Prize competition. And the whole idea of Avatar Medic is really, trying to, and this is the Mars shot vision, right? Mars shot, Moon and Earth. The Mars shot eventually is to actually create a solar system-wide medical platform that will offer real-time remote relief. In other words, and converging all the current exponential technologies like XR, which is spatial computing, with AI, with robotics, with blockchain, because we're working in healthcare, so the blockchain actually would eventually play an important aspect to that whole vision. But that's really what we're trying to create with Avatar Medic, right? Where you're able to eventually bring in, experts. And in this case, because it's Avatar Medic, we're focusing on medicine, we're bringing in medical experts in real time, remotely, to be able to help, bring them in full immersion, right? Like the whole sensorium, the human being, with all the haptics and the sensors and all this, and then with the, spatial computing, bring them in, and then they work together to support, consult, train the on-site, first responder or, the medical providers that there at the injury site. So the injury site could be a disaster area, it could be a military war zone, it could be on the surface of the moon or Mars. So that's kind of really where we're going with Avatar Medic. And I see where this convergence of all this technology actually really could benefit and, save lives. And that's kind of where we're heading.
Rob.
Geez, yeah, this is a big topic. So I have a background as an artist, installation artist, a visual artist. I work with many people who have a STEM education, but I say I have a flower education because I have an education in the arts. I suppose history and writers maybe are the roots. I'm not sure what part of the plant they might be. But so immersive experiences is something I've thought about through various channels or through various platforms, whether they be made out of bits or made out of atoms. Mm-hmm. And it was interesting to think about education through that lens as well, about like how people, I think technology, when it works best, it disappears, right? Like it allows people to do something together that they wouldn't normally do. So I think of it as an enabler, which is what you call it, which I thought was really interesting. And I think of mission. I mean, the JPL, mission is kind of a capital M word. It's like mission. Like,
we're on the mission.
But I think we all have missions that we live through, whether they're a startup or whether they're an education platform or raising a kid or doing whatever it is that we do. And I think it's funny. I mean, I was just listening on the way here. Like I feel like half of my podcast feed is full of people reviewing the new 16-inch MacBook Pro. And like that's great, and I kind of want one. But it's also like I don't think like if it like what's going to move the needle in my life, and it's probably actually like things I would do with the computer, which is like kind of an old school Apple concept, right? It's like it sort of allows you to be your best creative self. And so I think immersive technology, this idea of like getting beyond the device and getting into shared experience and stuff is super interesting. And it's like the thing that like really makes me wake up every day is just being like, oh, like I think we are in this era of like the self-centered technology realm, whether that's through social media or something like that, where we're just like spewing ourselves into the digital space all the time. And I think it's much more interesting and maybe much more socially positive to figure out, to again refocus on that connectivity and that kind of interaction with people. I was just visiting a school group, a class at Scripps, which is in part of the Claremont colleges. In Claremont, California, and it was really interesting because I think of like, you think of like millennials or like Gen Z folks as like being so digitally enabled and stuff, but like I let them try out the HoloLens and stuff, and like they get to share the same thing, and they were so like into it as as a social thing, like they were moving things around, and like a person was jumping over this like augmented reality, it's like a little, it's a unicorn is what it is. But I was like, how do you say that on it's a unicorn. So they had this like had this inflatable unicorn in augmented reality, and we were like making them jump over one another, and then they were jumping over them together, and it's because they can all see the same thing, right? And it's it's a gaming experience, quote unquote, but like in physical space together. And that like really made me happy, because I was just like, oh, like even though I think of all those students as being extremely digitally savvy, they're still not so jaded that they can have fun through like a shared digital experience. And so that type of enlightened moment in their lives, I really want to bring to space missions at JPL, to let people to make the promise of technology alive, like to be like, oh, I had this technological moment that made me do this amazing thing. Like that's like the script that we have like for like marketing departments about technology. And like I think if we can take things like AR and XR and those kinds of platforms and actually create those moments, that's a win, right? If we let it just feed ads to our brains all the time, we've lost. So like that to me is like a really important part of the technology, and I really hope that as VR and AR continues to grow, that those moments don't slip away, and that we don't just fall back into, again, an immersive experience that's completely antisocial as opposed to one that's social. So I'm trying.
Yeah, I think immersive technology is good for some aspect, but if it improves the quality of your life and other people that has meaning to you, I think it will be adopted a lot easier, right? Onboarding of people to use it. If it has negative, experience, then you're going to have a challenge, right? To onboard people to use. Maybe they're on board and then they get like, oh, this is not for me. They find it boring. Mm-hmm. They don't have. Mm-hmm. Hey, go back to the word joy, right? Fun. It's just our human nature. If we don't enjoy something and we don't feel happy about it, and it doesn't make us feel uplifted, we're not going to do it. We're not going to use it. So I think that's a huge challenge right now, because even I have to say sometimes I'm going, this is kind of boring, I gotta but it has I could see the potential. We're still at the very early phase of this technology. We're like the innovators, yourself and David, we're innovators, we're pioneers, and visionaries, and so it's still very early days. It has a lot of potential, I think, for improving quality of life. I see the potential there, this immersive experience. I
mean, the best is when you can find a use case where it's just absolutely essential, right? I mean, you can think about, let's say, radio communications, where, at first it was used as a utility to ship communication, military. Eventually, somebody figured out a business model around broadcasting, which was a new word. No one had ever thought you're just speaking to nobody in particular and just throwing it out there, and you're going to sell an appliance to pick up the waves. Like, that was a crazy idea. I think his name was David Sarnoff, RCA. And so I'm thinking about mission enablement, right? So it's like, the rest of this conference is concerned with immersive media applications to entertainment and enterprise, but space to me is like a really clear-cut case of being like, it's a mission enabler. Like, if we don't have high enough levels of immersion for an avatar medic, then this moon mission will not happen, because the safety is just not a solved problem. Like, you know what I mean? Until you have a high enough level of presence that if somebody has a medical issue, they can be tended to by a remote surgeon, for example.
Yeah,
like
exactly.
It could be that those are the types of, like, space is the killer app.
Oh, absolutely.
That causes immersive technology to be just a given. Like, it's just integrated in. And with people's jobs. Yeah.
I mean, just the whole idea. Space is, I think, for immersive technology and for future astronauts even now in the ISS, but that's low Earth orbit. But if you're going to go deep space, not to the moon, I'm talking about going to Mars. I think the whole idea of integrating the immersive technology into the spacecraft, or when future settlers into the base, the base colony itself. I don't like using that word, settlement itself. Then you don't need to be tethered. You don't need to be reliant on mission control or remote teams to be able to give you that support, right? So that's kind of where I see space is where, to open that real portal to really manifest the vision of us becoming a multiplanetary species. I see the potential of immersive technology to enable that, because ultimately, if we are going to achieve that vision, we need to be autonomous. We need to be totally untethered to Earth or to the moon, or to any kind of gateway. We need to be totally independent as space travelers or settlers, in deep space missions or on the planetary surface, Mars and beyond.
Yeah, and we were talking about how it's really the speed of light that dictates that independence.
At this moment, I'm going to say.
Oh yeah, we have an argument about that, but okay. Yeah, Rob, you were
I
nodding your
think
head.
This idea of immersive technology is really interesting, and I think it's important. So I've recently, only since working on Protospace, become, I would call myself an AR nerd. I'm a general technology dork, but I think what really made me, the kind of light bulb come on for me about AR is that it recognizes in some way the physical space we're already in, and it makes me think about, like, when I put on an AR headset, that any part of the experience I'm having could be an immersive experience, like I think, for instance, like a 2-year-old, right? Like, they may think of their favorite stuffed animal as an immersive technology, right? Because it makes them, when they hold it or when it's close to them, they feel a certain way, or they have a certain calmness to them, or they have a certain kind of sense of well-being. And that's a technology, right? Like in the kind of lowercase t version of the word. And I think, any humans thinking of going to deep space are going to need to be tethered in a way to their humanity, right? And like, if we approach immersive technology as a kind of, through like a kind of libertarian ideology, that it's a self-standing, self-supporting entity separate from the world that it's in, I don't think it's going to be successful, right? Because like, we have to keep the technology platform tethered to the world that it's in, right? And to the people that are using it, through physical objects or through memories or through fictional narrative storytelling, like film does. Like these tendrils we have to keep out into the other parts of human experience, because it's just going to feel as fake as it feels now, right? Like, if it's just sort of standing on its own. And so I think the deep space challenge is particularly interesting and difficult problems area to try to keep that going.
Absolutely, but it forces you to be innovative.
Right.
I mean, that's what the space, when you put the space factor into your equation, you as developers, as engineers, as visionaries, as creators, you're forced to think very out of the box, because space is the unknown. And, secretly, I just feel like we want to develop the holodeck. I'm sorry. But that is where the full immersion is going to happen. And the holodeck is, this Star Trek holodeck. For those who don't follow Star Trek, I'm a Star Trek geek.
Well, but wait, that's a really interesting point, because that was it served as a mechanism in that story to be able to do different types of episodes, but it was also serving this goal of tethering people to their humanity and their history, even though they were in this totally alien environment.
But the key thing is that it's so seamless. You wouldn't. It's like going into a matrix, but you won't know you're going to matrix. And when you're immersed in it, but you can pick your matrix, and then when you're in it, you're so immersed in it, you forget that you're in a matrix, that it's pre-programmed. That to me is, where this full immersion technology, the innovation of where we can go, and the convergence of these technology is eventually build a holodeck. I mean, that's how I see it. I mean, maybe it's maybe 50 years in the future, but we're going to head that way. We will. I'm very optimistic here.
That's a very nice close, actually. Does anybody have any questions? We have about 5 minutes for questions.
Be brave.
Yeah. None at all. You have one. Go ahead.
How do you both see more wider society? Right now you're talking about things that are they're in a special setting, they're in a zone, they're in a holodeck. But what's this like when every pair of glasses in the entire world has holograms in them? Everybody's spectacles, every wall, everything. Because once you build this stuff, it's pretty cheap to just roll it out everywhere. But so what's the society look like when language and words can turn into holograms that you can share together in space? Like, what do you see as, not just as a technology, but as a social? Like, what's the language look like in the future? I don't know. I'm just inviting you, like, down a little bit.
Just to, well, first of all, I'm going to say that if we replicate the disaster model of Earth, where it's Earth with lots of borders, and I'm talking about borders of psychological border, physical border, geographic borders, financial borders, if that's the society of the future that we create using these immersive technology, it's going to be disastrous. It's going to be replicated and duplicated, but in this virtual world, in this immersive world. So I think before we even answer that question, we have to ask ourselves, can we change? Do we want to change the whole way that we live our life on Earth? So that's how I'm going to answer it, because I don't see us as humanity, as a species, right now, where we're heading, to build this model that you're saying, to have everyone be in an immersive environment wearing the, whatever that whatever that technology is, and we all enter into that matrix, we're just going to be experiencing everything that we're experiencing now. So why do you want to go in there? So my question is, I'm going to ask everyone out there is like, where do we go from here? Do we change? Do we want to change? How do we change? Those are the questions I think we should answer first.
I had a slightly horrifying image after your question, where I was like, I've been having, I'm learning Spanish, and I'm not very good, but I'm learning, and because I have a new friend in my social circle who speaks, very fluent Spanish, but not very fluent English, and this is a person who I'd like to have more conversations with. But it made me think, like, we've all seen I see you're using an ad blocker. It made me think, like, I'm just going to see that in more and more experiences. Like, I'm going to, go to try to download my Google Interpreter so I can have a conversation with someone. It's going to be like, I see you're using an ad blocker. so I was just like, oh no, how do we fix that? Or how do we, I think in some ways curate our own worlds and needs, right, in order to be able to tune in what we need from immersive environments, and also figure out how to get them for ourselves, right? And that feels very weird and dangerous, because it just feels like it's going to come at us whether we like it or not, and it's going to be kind of up to us to figure out what our relationship to that is. So I think in some ways it's going to have to force us to be more selective about how we choose, like what we pick and choose, right, to enter our realm of experience. That said, I'm also super excited about it, and also I would love to have an immersive language interpreter for myself, because like this person's an amazing artist, a super creative thinker, and I just feel like my conversations with them are extremely basic, and it's like really, I feel it's quite tragic, really, just to be like, oh, I would love to pick this person's brain about X, and I know what I'm going to get is like, it's cold outside, because that's the conversation we can have, right? And so hopefully, I would like to see a future where I can actually just have an amazing conversation with this person, assisted through immersive experience, but we'll see if it happens.
I just also want to give a perspective from haptics, because
because
what I see happening now is, so I think we're coming to terms with the fact that we made a lot of mistakes with digital technology so far with regards to privacy and data and opting into experiences. The stakes were lower because if you get an annoying email, it stresses you out in some micro way, but it doesn't affect your life. But if you can reach out and touch anyone without their permission, that's like a huge problem, right? Think about haptic spam.
Yep.
And you can affect people's behavior through haptics and emotions without their conscious awareness. Actually, you can do this with Facebook feeds as well. Like that's why there's so many scandals around, psychological studies done by people being exposed to certain types of information and then seeing how their behavior changes. And then that's taken to the next level with immersive technology. So I think, from my perspective, that this is going to be a key issue is getting it right. Learning from our mistakes, being like, we're not going to do that again. We can't build the same models that are just purely funded by advertising. We can't let people expect that everything's free as long as they opt into ads. I mean, when I say we, there's no entity that can do this. It's basically individuals need to take control out of their own experiences and flip those switches, make good choices about what they expose themselves to. So, yeah.
Great. Yeah.
Right now, there's a downturn in the spatial computing industry. A lot of VR companies are going away, a lot of AR companies are going away. It's getting more monopolized. Companies are really like setting up their walled gardens, right? And
Yeah.
making it very proprietary what you can experience in their domain or their metaverse, their layers and stacks in this metaverse, right? So what I'm also seeing is that there's been a long history in the mixed reality world where you've had mad rush and different points through VR and AR that people rush in and then they churn out and only a small handful stay. I see that happening right now as well. So
Yeah.
my question is, now that it has turned down some and we're stepping back and we're seeing what our 2D media has been doing to us, right? Because now spatialized is not 2D media, it's not really 3D, it's more of a 5D experience, right? Because of haptics and because of telepresence and because of that I can teleport back and forth in metaversal scenarios. I think what would the stepping back and an overview of the ethical aspects of all of this, like what is the real true benefit for pushing humanity into the spatialized existence, and how do we include everybody, and how do we make sure that we don't have those situations where we're just getting spammed all the time with information and being touched in a way that we don't really want to be touched.
Right.
Yeah. No, yeah, but that's exactly it, right? So it's about individuals educating themselves and deciding what they do and do not want to participate in ultimately, right? I mean, you're not going to restrain people from making offers, right? You have to, from a very young age. There's actually this new term, I learned it because my wife works in this field of technology education, of digital citizenship. And like from a very early age, kids are learning digital citizenship, and it's a core part of what they're at school to learn. Yeah.
I'm being raised and thinking I'm a digital citizen, and everything I do online has ramification and effect across
Absolutely.
the network. Then I'm a little bit more cautious about how I
Absolutely. You're cautious, and then you're made aware. You're like, if something is being offered to you, like advertising is fine, right? But you need to understand that you're participating in something. Somebody's trying to get your money, and if you want to, you can give them your money and your attention. But if you don't want to, you don't have to. And here are your first principles to work from, about like whether or not this is worth your time and attention. We didn't have that education. We walked blindly into this situation because we didn't need to learn it because there was no reference point for it, right? But now we have this reference point. So hopefully we're not going to make the same mistake, but we'll see.
I think for XR or the immersive technology, for its biggest impact right now, the vertical industry is healthcare and medicine. I feel that, back to earlier what I said at the beginning of this panel, is that, if it benefits yourself, if it improves the quality of your life and others that you care about, you're going to use it, you're going to engage in it. See, so I feel like that is where I think with this technology of XR the convergence of, the haptics and the AI is healthcare. It's really transforming that industry, and for the better, I hope, right? And when it comes to ethics, of course, medicine, especially in the United States, it's very, there's a lot of ethical issues. There's a lot, there's very stringent rules and things. So that's definitely going to be integrated into, this vertical using these technologies. So, I feel like that in terms of this technology, the biggest disruptor of the vertical industry is healthcare, and everyone needs healthcare. Everyone needs medical care. So I think that is an exception to the rule of what we're saying, right? This your question, right? Where does that ethical borderline for someone touching you or entering into your space? Well, if you're sick, if you have an injury, if you want to be saved, you're going to have someone to touch you. Mm-hmm. You're going to have an intervention. So I think that would be a model. I think that would be the first proof of concept using this technology to address those issues. And blockchain could possibly be a way to address some of those issues, right?
Why? Because it's de-anonymized?
Yeah, decentralized, right? And blockchain is kind of like a sexy word everyone likes to throw in, right? But, it has its issues. But I'm saying the concept of that being integrated into the healthcare paradigm has potential, right? Because of patient confidentiality and privacy and all these things, right?
I do think it touched blockchain in your comment about this sort of pulling back of investment in AR, VR, and XR companies. I think the means is important. Like to your point about like the funding, I think. A lot of that funding has dried up because of people's new skepticism about platform capitalism, right? Like is every AR, VR company going to create the next Facebook, right? That's just ridiculous, like honestly. But like, and it's not something I want in my life really either. And so I think it's kind of slept on things like community-based currencies, and I'll use Patreon as a proper noun version of that. Like maybe people who are most invested, who have rallied together around a need or have an investment in the success of a project or company, could actually be a very motivating and powerful way to fund something and to make something come to life that doesn't need to be a publicly traded company or something like that. It could be a publicly traded company. I mean, that's kind of the original premise of the stock market. But I think those areas are rich areas to investigate, and also difficult areas to investigate, but important in that like how you get to a altruistic technology experience through AR, VR, or XR kind of needs to be thought about at the beginning. Like your first PowerPoint deck should wonder like how are we going to get there, and how we get there is important. And I think to sort of rely purely on the current VC model feels very difficult.
Facebook, I feel, is one of the biggest sort of tester experiences like on society, or like this lab or this kind of immersive world that we're entering over society, and how they're dealing with their algorithms, and they're dealing with their ads, and how they're dealing with their moderation, and the tool sets that they give people. A lot of what they do on their platform is very geared towards a certain group of people that utilize the platform.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't take a lot of other people into account. And
Right.
It's becoming very evident.
That's a great point. Yeah.
And very obvious.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So, but they're trying to make that metaversal experience as a gateway that everybody has spatial experiences through their Facebook. And so, the point of people trying to make a new Facebook, maybe they do need to make a Facebook.
Right.
Around, that learns lessons from the current Facebook.
Yeah. Sure. Right. Yep.
I really like what you just mentioned, building the altruistic technology. That is
Maybe we can do it. I don't know.
in the
We've
holodeck.
been trying for so long.
We're actually out of time. We have 6 minutes till the next panel.
Okay.
So let's thank our
Thank you.
panelists.
Yeah. Thanks for coming.
Thank you, everyone. So stay for Avatar Medic
Yeah, I
and the
think
X Prize.
Susan is the
panel.
next moderator.
I'll
so-
moderate this one.
Oh, cool.